This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
We're going to talk a little boxing and Showtime this weekend. Just two undefeated fighters. The Magnifico, Mark the Magnifico Magsayo, taking on Ray Vargas. This is going to be a lot of fun on Showtime. Al Bernstein is ready to join us. Al, how you feeling, baby? You feeling good?
Very good. Here in San Antonio, Texas, we're going to have the fight you mentioned and two other matches as well. Triple header on Showtime, so it should be fun. Nice to join you.
And it's a pleasure it's an honor for me to have you on. We've talked in the past over the years. I've been in the business for 32 years, so we've run into each other a couple of times, especially when I used to go out to Vegas a lot before for all the fights. So, Al, let's first of all, for you, since you've been at it for so long, what kind of a high is it for you when you walk into fight night? How is it for you nowadays since you've been to so many fights? And I was just talking about it like on Saturday night. This is Showtime's 7th title fight since March. I mean, they've been on a roll, giving fight fans one good fight card after another. And like you said, this one, there's several good fights on this fight card.
Yeah, we've had a really good stretch in the last couple of years in which we've been fortunate to have meaningful fights and also good fights. And sometimes you have really good fights, but they may not rise to the level of the highest level for whatever reason. But we've been fortunate to kind of combine those. For me, I mean, I've been broadcasting since 1980, but my enthusiasm for doing it is the same as it was the first time I sat down ringside. I enjoy the process. I enjoy the sport. I enjoy doing the TV. And so, I think if you reach a point where it isn't exciting for you, where it isn't interesting, that's when you should stop doing it.
I'm with you there. I mean, listen, I've been doing this for 32 years. And now that I switched over from traditional radio to these digital platforms now, which is kind of the thing, but I still do it just like you with the same kind of enthusiasm. Now, let me ask you, Al.
Sure.
Has the MMA UFC inspired boxing a little bit? Am I being a little bit too much of a homer for boxing? But I almost get the feeling like boxing's kind of looked over at the octagon and said, well, they bust their ass to make sure they come up with the best fights on a consistent basis. Where in our sport here, at times, in decades past, we kind of let the promoters kind of controlled things and and kept their fighters away from some of the best fights, and we weren't treated to what we needed to get treated to. I almost get the feeling that there's been a little bit more urgency in the sport to, hey, we got to get the best fights going so we can get the most attention and give boxing fans what they want. Am I being a little homerish? Or do you see a little bit of a change?
I don't know if it's MMA related, but I do think that boxing in the last year or so, I actually think coming out of in the last couple of years, boxing's done a better job of trying to make those kinds of fights. What makes boxing different than MMA is, there's two major bodies in MMA. There's UFC, which is the dominant one, and then there's Bellator. Within the ranks of their fighters, they can make any fights they want, and they control most of the sport. In boxing, we have more different interests, right? And you have 4 different organizing bodies making champions, so there's a lot. It's I always call it laissez-faire capitalism run amok. It's so it gets to be difficult. But boxing has done a better job in the last several years of putting a better product out there and trying to make the fights that matter. I especially noticed it coming out of the COVID period, where boxing got back into putting on shows a little quicker than some other sports. It was a little more logistically feasible with a boxing match to sequester it, and you only had 2 athletes involved. And boxing, I thought, made it's never a conscious decision by everyone because people are not necessarily working together, but somehow by osmosis, they all seem to kind of get on the same page and say, we're gonna really, really try to make these matches, if at all humanly possible. And for the most part, they've done it. And boxing has had, listen, boxing is more of a niche sport than it was 30 years ago. And people make the claim that other than the NFL, every sport is a niche sport, right? To some degree. But so I don't expect boxing to reach a level that it did in the 80s when it was a halcyon time. But the sport has made a lot of strides in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years of, I think, kind of reestablishing itself with fans.
Yeah, but I will always come back to people and say, yeah, it's a niche sport, but it's still one of the better worldwide sports. And that's one of the things that when we put all the sports together, they're not all loved worldwide.
Absolutely. And
Boxing,
that's where we get kind of jingoistic when we look at sports from an American viewpoint. The boxing has remained super viable internationally. And now the beauty now is, and you talked about being on a digital platform, which makes your broadcast experience different and expands your horizon. That's what's happened for all sports, and it's especially important for boxing because now the world has shrunk, and all the international bouts are available for the most part everywhere, and it's made it where the fact that it's global, we're all kind of tied into it.
Yeah. Don't tell the Mexicans that it's niche. Don't tell the Puerto Ricans that it's niched.
Or the fans of the UK. Yeah.
The UK. I was going to say the English. Don't tell the English it's niche. They love their boxing, dude. So yeah, it's one of those. We get that jingoistic viewpoint, but being a Cuban American that I am, hey man, I grew up with my dad, and every week he's getting Ring magazine, and we're off and running and watching the different matches, and obviously and watching Univision on Friday and Saturday nights, and watching the Mexican fighters, all of that. So I grew up with that. So for me, it's a little different because I do understand that the international attention to boxing is still there for a lot of fights. All right, so let's get to this fight. So Vargas has worked with Roach. Now Roach is on the other side. You've seen a lot of these fights. How much of that is really an advantage? They talked about it in the press conference, both guys. But you got plenty of experience, Al, in this. How much does Magnifico have a little bit of an advantage having Roach in his corner?
The interesting thing about this fight is it's a meeting of Nacho Bernstein, who's training Vargas, the great Mexican trainer, against Freddie Roach. They've had their battles with Juan Manuel Marquez and Pacquiao. And I don't attribute too much to the Roach having had some dealings with Vargas, because Nacho Bernstein has been the primary influence for him. And I think what makes this fight interesting is the fact that it's very, we have a true boxer in Ray Vargas, tall, rangy, who'll have a height and reach advantage, even though he's coming up in weight. His dimensions for a 126 pounder, he was at 122. He's 5'10. He's got a long reach. He is kind of, a different body type. And Mark Magsayo is the true puncher in this fight. He's had fights where he's been behind on the scorecards, had to pull things out with a knockout, did that against Ceja. And so we have a true kind of different approaches here in the ring, and we're going to see which one of them ends up being the dominant one.
I almost feel like, because again, these are things that we got to talk about, and we say, is it a myth or is it real? Roach, is it myth or is it real? That is it an advantage? And I almost feel like Mark, is it real or is it a myth? Your victory against Gary Russell Jr. So a lot of people are wondering, okay, well, maybe you got lucky there, and let's see what you do now, against Vargas. So he's kind of you might have a guy in Mark coming into that ring with a little bit of a chip on his shoulders because a lot of people aren't believing what he did against Russell. What do you feel about that?
Well, yeah, the irony is you win a world title against one of the longest reigning champions that people didn't think was beatable at that point, although Vasily Lomachenko beat him and certainly but other fighters didn't. And yet you're being questioned. And the reason he's being questioned, quite frankly, is for people that didn't see Gary Russell Jr. went to that fight with an injured shoulder. Even said before the fight that he had an injury. He didn't define what it was. And early in the fight, that injury hampered him. It became obvious he couldn't use his left hand almost at all in the fight. And Magsayo even realized that. And it actually wasn't a great performance by Mark Magsayo. He did win the fight, should have won the fight, and it was appropriate for him to win the fight. In fact, I thought the scorecards were too close. But Russell did such a good job of kind of neutering him in parts of the fight, and Magsayo didn't take advantage of as much as he should have of Russell being hampered. That it raises questions about Magsayo, and rightfully, because of the injury, people wonder would he have won without it. So that has given Magsayo, motivation to show people that I'm not a one-hit wonder. I'm going to move forward. And it is interesting. For your first title defense, it's very tricky to have to face Vargas, who, as I said, is this tall, rangy fighter who is a clever boxer. He has not had a knockout in 6 years. He goes the distance. His fights go the distance. He outboxes you. And so it's intriguing for Magsayo to have this as his first title defense. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Al Bernstein joining us here from Showtime. All right. So, and on the Vargas side, whether people talk about the layoff or they question, although they question the power going up 4 pounds because of his frame, Al, I maybe if it was a smaller frame, I might be a little bit concerned, but in a taller frame, I don't think the 4 pounds are that big a deal. So again, the myth or the reality of all of this, the layoff, the gaining of the pounds for Vargas, you tell me, how do you see that?
Yeah, for him to be 126 pounds with his body frame makes perfect sense. And here's the point. He's not a big puncher. He wasn't a big puncher at 122 pounds. He has some pop, but again, no knockout in 6 years. He wins by decision. That's how he wins. He's not inactive. He throws 64 punches per round. He's an active fighter. It's just that he doesn't knock people out. So you wouldn't expect him to knock somebody out at 126. The place where you would say a question was you move up, you're facing more powerful punchers. Magsayo is a powerful puncher. And I wouldn't be surprised to say that Magsayo is the biggest puncher that Vargas has thus far faced. He faced a good brand of opposition at 122 pounds. There weren't a lot of huge punchers mixed in, and now on top of that, he's going up in weight. So in terms of that, the moving up in weight could have an impact. But in terms of his performance, it shouldn't be anything that would be detrimental to him in any way.
Magsayo is plus 100. Vargas is minus 115. So Vegas has it pretty even. Magsayo is 24-0. Vargas 35-0. Who do you got, Al? What do you think happens?
Yeah, well, I don't like to make a prediction on fights that I announce, but I will say that what this fight is going to hinge on is can Vargas stay away from the power of Magsayo and peck and paw his way to a victory over rounds, or can Magsayo get to him with some power? I think that's what this fight is going to kind of hinge on.
It's going to be fun tomorrow night, Showtime. Make sure you catch it. Al, thank you for taking some time. We always appreciate it. I look forward to doing it again, my friend. Thank you very much. Enjoy the boxing.
Thank you. Nice to visit with you.
You got it. The great Al Bernstein, man. Talking a little Showtime boxing tomorrow night, 9:00. Magsayo taking on Vargas. And again, we're talking about 59-0 stepping into the ring. That's a lot of fun. And by the way, there's 2 other fights on this card that are really, really good. So if you got a chance tomorrow, make sure you watch it because that's going to be a lot of fun. You are definitely going to enjoy it. All right. We thank the great people at Showtime for making it happen for us here on the program. I told you every couple of weeks we will have a Showtime boxer, fighter. It could be from Bellator, trainer, analyst, something along those lines, and we'll be talking about all of that. So great to have Al Bernstein on, man. As I
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.